Welcome back to The Science of Wellness. Today's guest is someone who is not only redefining how we heal, but also who gets to heal, starting with the healers themselves. Joining me is Dr. Kath Jones, a GP based in the Scottish Highlands and founder of Wild-Ness Health, a collective reimagining of a more whole person NHS. After personally facing burnout, Kath became an accredited lifestyle medicine physician and has since led the charge in integrating lifestyle and mind-body medicine into traditional healthcare systems. Wild-Ness has hosted more than 20 transformational CPD events for healthcare professionals, including the Sustainable Healer Conference, which brought together clinicians, creatives, and change makers from across the UK. In this episode, we unpack what it really means to treat the whole person, why nervous system regulation is the missing link in so much of modern medicine, and how rest, nature, and community can spark sustainable healing, not just for patients, but for providers too. This one is deeply human, deeply hopeful conversation. Let's get into it. Welcome, Dr. Kath. I'm glad to have you on The Science of Wellness.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
So, Dr. Kath, I ask this question of every guest that comes on the podcast. What does wellness mean to you personally, and how has your definition evolved over time?
So I guess it has evolved a lot over time. I did a sort of traditional training as a doctor, completed that in 1998, and then went on to train as a GP. And initially, I guess a lot of my training and my thoughts were around the kind of quest to eliminate pain and illness, in my patients. So thinking about lots of tests and giving treatments to patients in the consultation with the aim of eliminating pain and illness for them. And then I guess over time that's shifted quite a bit, and I think about health more about as our ability to overcome pain and illness, that it's an inevitable experience in life to experience pain and illness and obviously eventually death. And that so maybe health is more about our ability to cope and thrive in the face of pain and illness rather than this quest to eliminate those things that are an inevitable part of life. And I think that's maybe a more realistic approach, and an approach that's served me better personally and feels better in the consultation room and seems to be well received by patients.
That is very interesting. You are the first guest who've mentioned pain in speaking terms of wellness, and I would like to come back to that a little bit later. You've been a GP, an acupuncturist, and an open water swimming coach, and now you're also a retreat founder. What was the personal professional moment that sparked the creation of Wild-Ness?
I guess I've always been interested in complementary approaches to healthcare. So I did my acupuncture training at the same time as my GP training year, so over 20 years ago, and I've used that throughout my NHS career, really, within NHS consultations, and I've just found it to be incredibly helpful, and I think it helps you see people's pain in a different way. You see patterns of pain that I wouldn't have seen from my conventional training, this concept of myofascial pain that is really, really responsive to acupuncture. I practice Western acupuncture, which is often used for myofascial pain. And so that's kind of been a thread through my career. I ended up going into medical leadership, and I love many aspects of that job. With the opportunity to be really creative. But in the end, I think it was so frustrating because I realised how big the NHS is so big, which is great because we can kind of move seamlessly through it as patients because it's one organisation, but the size of it makes it so difficult to change anything. So I ended up getting very exhausted from the job because I was putting too much energy into it. And that's then sparked this other interest, I guess, in health of health professionals and tools that we can use for ourselves that of course we are people too. So if things work for us in terms of creating health, then looking at how we can use that with our patients who are experiencing poor health.
How do they like you also being able to do acupuncture in a session with them?
Yeah, I mean, you get the odd person who says, oh no, I hate needles, there's no way I'm having that.
That's why I'm asking, yes.
Yeah, I use it for very specific conditions because I'm integrating it into an NHS consultation. I need to be able to give the treatment within a couple of minutes, and I also need it to be a condition that I think will respond within 3 sessions, because what I can't do is build up more and more people who need long-term acupuncture. So yeah, I use it a lot for what I would call myofascial headaches that come from muscle tension around the back of the head and come over and concentrate around the eye. I use it a lot for odd pains that don't make sense from a conventional approach, and yet from a myofascial trigger point approach make complete sense. So sometimes, you'll have someone who's gone round the houses, all sorts of examinations and scans, and acupuncture can be really helpful for that. So it helps you see people's pain in a different way, and see for some people an easy solution for that, where you can map it to this trigger point referred pattern of pain. So I've had some really good results with that, and obviously for patients, when you can get rid of their pain, or I use acupressure as well a lot. So that's where you show the patient the trigger point. So for example, semispinalis, which is a muscle around the back of the skull, you can show them where that trigger point is and help explain to them how they can apply massage to that area to alleviate the pain. So yeah, patients generally are really, really grateful for that. Yeah.
I really like that you're implementing something alternative to just the Western medicine. But I want to jump back to where you mentioned you got really tired with all the energy you had to put in. And this is a big problem for health professionals across the world because they struggle with burnout, but they are expected to keep showing up and giving more of themselves. What does sustainable healing look like for caregivers as well as patients?
So, from a personal point of view, for me, it was really changing the way that I thought of health and saw my role. So I think before I thought of health as being mainly about the healthcare system, and therefore me as the provider of healthcare, me being the biggest factor in the patient's health in front of me. And that kind of drew me into this, what I would call drama triangle. So the drama triangle, which is dysfunctional form of interpersonal interaction described by Stephen Cartman in 1965, where you have a rescuer, a victim, and a perpetrator. And I think when, as health professionals, we're in a consultation and we're thinking that the most important thing is the healthcare the person's receiving, and therefore that's a huge burden for us to carry, we're kind of in this rescue mode where we're doing things to the patient to provide short-term relief. So, for example, people with chronic pain, giving painkillers, people with obesity, giving these weight loss injections. In doing so, our intentions may be good, but what happens is that we encourage the patient into the victim role where they feel helpless and hopeless, and that creates this kind of dynamic of fear, blame, and judgment that can kind of reverberate around the system. And the thing with the drama triangle is it's a very unstable dynamic, so people flip roles quite frequently. So you can start off being the rescuer, but you can end up feeling like the victim yourself, feeling overwhelmed, helpless and hopeless, because actually when you try and use this fixing approach for patients, the vast majority of presentations in the NHS are conditions caused or exacerbated by lifestyle. So when you use this fixing role for conditions caused by lifestyle, it doesn't work. So it's very frustrating for us as the health professionals and for the patients. So for me, it was this understanding that concept and knowing that there is another way, which, I would refer to as the empowerment dynamic, where as the health professional, I've shifted in the main position of a coach, where I ask questions of the patient to facilitate understanding, to create conditions for a breakthrough in their thinking about the root cause of their symptoms. And that inevitably, when you shift from rescuer to coach, you encourage the patient to shift from victim to creator. So when someone's in creator mode, they're making the best of their context. So, if you have a long-term health condition, it's about making the best of your context, which may not mean, eliminating that healthcare condition. It's about learning, as I said before, learning knowledge, skills, and confidence that are going to help you navigate or overcome that long-term condition. So for me, it's the concept of sustainable healing is about really first it's about self-awareness, I suppose, having an understanding of how our own thoughts, feelings, and actions impact on us and people around us, and how we do have the ability to take control of that, or even though it may not always feel like it, that we can draw attention to our daily habits, what we tell ourselves about our lives, to help us feel the increases sense of agency, of having a sense of control over our life. So it's really been about a change in philosophy, I suppose, rather than new facts. It's been a change in my approach that I think has enabled me to really enjoy my job again. It's given me a lot of energy. It's released a lot of creativity. It means I can work as an NHS GP and run a business and do lots of other things. So yeah, it's given me a new lease of life, removing myself from that sense that it was all about me, realizing it's much more about the patient, and my job is to kind of have a library of tools that can help the patient tap into their inner strength and maybe really get to the root of what's happening with them. Mm-hmm.
you emphasize that you look at whole person care.
Mm-hmm.
So, for someone who's listening and who's new to this concept, what does it really mean to treat the whole person in practice and not just in theory or just their symptoms?
So, whole person care really refers to recognizing the impact of our environment, by which I mean, our relationships, the context in which we're living, our beliefs, and our behaviors to recognize the impact of that on our health. So, it's a much more sort of 3D approach to people, maybe, than a conventional approach where we might ask about who do you live with and what's your job, but it tends to be a much more superficial approach. So this is really trying to get to the essence of the person and really recognizing the impact of experiences on them. I mean, particularly the group of patients I'm seeing, a lot of people with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and a lot of those people have had some really difficult experiences. We know that that those conditions are associated with a higher rate of adverse childhood experiences. So people for whom, when they were growing up, the people who should have been their caregivers either actively harmed them or didn't keep them safe from harm. So not everyone who has chronic pain and chronic fatigue has that experience, but it's recognized as a significantly higher rate. Recognizing the impact of those experiences on how our nervous system has developed, on how our ability to regulate our emotions has developed, can be really important, and helping people know that can be tremendously empowering for them, because often people have developed quite negative set of beliefs about themselves. They're bad people, they can't cope, they're not, they're of no value, rather than having this understanding of how that early childhood experience has impacted on them. But the concept of neuroplasticity both explains that, but it also holds the key to overcoming those challenges. So once you explain, in my experience, once you explain that to patients, it helps them make sense of their experience, but it also gives them hope and some strategies that they can use for free starting right now of how they can start to change their life and make it more like how they want it to be. So it's this kind of double benefit, really, of those kind of concepts.
I'm going to go back to neuroplasticity a little bit later with you as well. But now I want to go to Wild-Ness and your new community for health professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So to you, what was missing from the conventional healthcare spaces that you felt compelled that you needed to create yourself?
So I think a lot of education traditionally for health professionals has been on quite an industrialized scale. It's been focused on facts. So generally what would happen, many of us will go, as GPs, will go to an annual update. We'll be given a massive manual like that of facts. And if anyone is like me, some of the, I'll pick up a few things from the day, and then I'll go home with my manual and it will sit on my bookshelf, and it will sort of look at me and make me feel really guilty and really incompetent, that there's so much that I don't know. And so that kind of reinforced this message of feeling overwhelmed, actually, and feeling helpless and hopeless, and how could I possibly know all this stuff? And so I think what I wanted to try and do was to really think about the conditions in which we learn well. And we know that the brain has three parts. It has the prefrontal cortex, which is this kind of executive functioning. It has the emotional brain, and then it has the brainstem, which is all about survival. And we learn best when our brain activity is in the prefrontal cortex. So how do we create spaces for people to really learn? And that's where the idea came of blending the kind of concept about retreats with education. Because actually, if you create spaces where people feel psychologically safe, with a big focus on nature, creativity, good food, on a relatively small scale, where you can create those bonds of trust, where people can share difficult experiences. That's how we learn, is by sharing experiences that have been hard. So I've kind of tried to go back to a blank canvas and think about education in a new way, particularly for people who maybe are struggling, in their role, feeling burnt out, have long-term health conditions themselves, think of leaving medicine, which is, I guess, informed by my own experience of feeling really fed up and really wanting to get out, because I didn't feel like I was doing anything useful, and I also just felt like it wasn't doing me any good myself. So I've tried to kind of mine on those experiences and go back to the drawing board. So at our recent conference, people weren't given a big handbook like that of facts. They were given a blank book to fill in all the things that resonated them from the event. So when they went away, they had a completely personalized inventory of the concepts and the tools that are going to help them, either as individuals or in their professional role, or both. So it's trying to, again, shift from this concept of the drama triangle, fear, blame, and judgment, all these things, facts you should know, to the empowerment dynamic, building knowledge, skills, and confidence that are going to help you navigate the job as a health professional in a way that serves you well, but also serves your patient well and the system well, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes complete sense. And I'm glad you highlighted that you're creating places where the doctors can feel psychologically safe
Yeah,
so that they can learn better and learn new concepts.
yeah.
But now I want to stay on the nervous system specifically. And you're launching a new platform to help people retrain how their nervous system affects their body. Why is the nervous system such a crucial missing link in the way we approach healing today?
So yeah, the platform at the moment is going to be just for health professionals. So it's a kind of follow-up really from the conference. So it's going to be taking some of the learning from the conference and putting it into more bite-sized learning events. You know, not everyone can travel to the Highlands for a 2-day conference. It's expensive financially, but it's also expensive in terms of time. So it's really trying to broaden out the accessibility of that approach. And, you know, again, we'll be thinking really mindful about how we do that. So in conversation at the moment with a lot of the people I've been working with over the last 2 years. So Kiva Keohane, she's a yoga teacher, Celtic storyteller, and a nature conservationist. And she is fantastic at, even over the internet, creating that kind of space and that trust and helping people really feel present in the event, which is how we learn, you know. So yeah, it's going to be really thoughtful about that and how we can particularly make that learning available to the people who need it most, which are the health professionals who are burning out, you know, and feeling unwell for whatever reason. So yeah, it's going to be a mixture of recorded and live content. Not fully; these things take time, you know. So it's all in development at the moment. But there will definitely be a focus on helping people understand more about the nervous system. I mean, it's very strange, you know. You go on Instagram and all these spaces, and I guess it depends on the algorithm, doesn't it? But mine is full of all this stuff about the nervous system. And yet, in healthcare circles, NHS circles, people barely talk about that. So we're so distracted in conventional healthcare by what I would call things in our circle of concern, so tests and treatment. So obviously there's been amazing developments in drug development, in technology, which is wonderful. But I think the way that our approach to health draws our attention to all of those things. And some of those things, you know, carry harm, you know, so most drugs have at least some adverse effects. And some of those, you know, it's mind-boggling how many people end up in hospital because of the adverse effects of drugs. So our whole approach to healthcare at the moment draws our attention to circle of concern. And that's a distraction from circle of control, which is our daily habits and, you know, how our thoughts and feelings impact on physical symptoms, you know, which is all about nervous system regulation. There will be very much a focus on creating a safe space where people can share difficult experiences to help people understand the importance of that so they can know that for themselves, but also share it with their patients. And then, you know, focus on helping people develop a library of tools. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, a conventional approach to care is quite one-size-fits-all. But this is all about turning healthcare really into an art, because what you want to do is help your patient find a way into themselves. So a lot of the people I see with chronic pain and what I would have called medically unexplained symptoms are quite disconnected from themselves. They just feel completely lost in their life. They feel no sense of control. They have very little power. I work in an area of quite health needs, so most people don't own their own home, they don't have formal qualifications. A lot of them, you know, have had a lot of relationship problems and conflict, money worries, drug use, alcohol problems, lack of meaning and purpose in their life. So yeah, this concept of a library of tools, one size fits all is not going to work for that, with a focus on tools that are free, either free because it's freely available online or free because it's, you know, breath work. So that's sort of my particular interest, because I'm particularly interested in how we can integrate these approaches into NHS care. I don't do private practice. I don't see patients privately. My interest is how can we make these tools, which normally would be only available to people with, you know, money, how can we make them freely available to the section of society that need them most? Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. It is amazing that you say that it's free tools, because there's so many times when I'm in a conversation with someone and they think that specifically on the lifestyle medicine or longevity
Yeah,
medicine side,
yeah,
that you need to have all these supplements or red lights or peptides or whatever else.
yeah,
But you don't. If you go back to the simple interventions like breath work, it's those things that might even be more effective for you as a person, depending
yeah.
on what your situation is.
So I think I was drawn to lifestyle medicine because the kind of, or my understanding of what lifestyle medicine means is it's all about the idea of shifting power from organizations and institutions to people and communities. And that's what drew me to it, to overcome health inequalities. I think the problem is, there's a risk that lifestyle medicine can become a different version of conventional medicine if it's overrun with tests and treatment, and there's so much development now in that space of supplements and tests. I'm just not interested in all of that because I think there's enough. That's just not what interests me personally, and that's not being critical of other people who are interested in that. It's just my own personal interest is in working in the NHS myself and helping other people who want to work in the NHS. How can we make that exciting again? Because a lot of people just are so fed up with it. And how can we make the science, because it is all science, that's a really important thing to say. So a lot of the kind of philosophy is kind of ancient wisdom, yoga and breath work and some of the principles are ancient, been around for thousands of years, but actually they are now backed up by functional MRI scans, and modern day research showing the power of these approaches. And I just feel like modern medicine, it's so interesting. The NHS will say it's so overspent, the staff are so burnt out. The sickness rate in NHS staff is shocking for a national health service. So it's kind of in the victim role, in my view, the NHS. And I think what it needs to do is get in creator role and say what actually is health. This utopian definition that we work to of a complete sense of emotional, physical, and mental well-being, not just the absence of disease or frailty. That is the working definition of health, and it's completely out of reach to all of us. So I think that's driving this kind of dystopian approach where we're seeing a lot of harm and waste to health professionals, harm to patients, huge waste, harm to the planet. When you stand back and look at it properly, it's very shocking how the health service is running itself. And I think as health professionals, it's my own personal view that we once you see that, you can't unsee it. And I know many people who have done coaching training, there's more health professionals now who have done that, suddenly all look at things in a completely different eye. And so I think for me, for health, one of the kind of big things I'm trying to do with Wild-Ness Health is to draw people together, whether they're people interested in lifestyle medicine, mind-body medicine, health professionals concerned about the climate emergency, health professionals who've got burnout, managers who are under pressure to save money. For me, all of these problems that we have, these big problems with the health service, have the same solution, which is adopting this more whole person approach to care, drawing our attention towards psychological approaches psychological concepts, frameworks that can help us and our patients make sense of their experience of life and help people to feel more in control of their lives. And I think if we, adopted that philosophy, we have the Darzi report, about the NHS, and they're talking about shifting work from secondary care to primary care. I think we should just talk about shifting work from the NHS out, to people. That's my own personal view.
Now, I completely agree with that. I want to bring us back to your whole person approach and your retreats that are happening overlooking Loch Ness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just symbolic because you've done this intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And now, considering the whole person approach, what does nature and stillness and space play in someone's healing journey?
So, there's a lot of evidence that blue and green scenery helps calm the nervous system, brings us into the prefrontal cortex, helps us, have clarity of thought. There's a huge body of evidence showing that. I think for me, the other thing about where I live, there's an amazing community that's kind of evolved as a result of, it's hard to say what causes what, but there's certainly an incredible community here, and quite a few people are drawn here with health problems because they think the area will be good for their health, and rightly so. And then they often discover creativity or an activity related to nature connection that they then start doing as their work. And so there's a really vibrant community of holistic therapists, creative artists that are developing in this area. So for me, holding the retreats here is not just about the stunning scenery, it's also about the amazing array of people that I can collaborate with to really bring direct insight and experience to health professionals coming on these events. And that's why it's this concept of education, but education through experience rather than education through reading, a big manual of facts. Actually, if you experience it, the way you will then talk to your patients will be in such a more authentic and impactful way.
You've also brought together creatives and clinicians and people with lived experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So, what have you learned from putting all these diverse voices in the same room? And
Yeah.
why do you think it is so powerful to listen to these diverse voices?
Yeah. So the voices in a way are diverse, but actually what they're saying is very, very similar. And this kind of shared intention, to change our culture of health in the UK. So there's a massive commonality, although we're coming at it from different perspectives, and that's obviously what's brought us together. So, but it's been interesting for me. I mean, lived experience, particularly, the people that I've met have taught me so much that I had never learned through a conventional approach, and that's why that is a big thread through all the events that I run, is people who feel able to share their lived experience, but also making sure that's a positive experience for them. That's a pretty scary thing to do. Talk about the most difficult time of your life. It's very scary. Yeah, so it's been it might look like a diverse collection of people, but actually there's a hugely common thread that holds those people together. And I think the other kind of commonality is that I really like working with people not just who are experts in their field, but have that openness and curiosity to learn from others. So sometimes when people become experts, they go to an event, they just think of themselves as a speaker, and they don't maybe think of themselves as there also to learn. And this really came home to me at the conference, which was last month. I had 12 speakers, and a couple of them have got kind of global profiles, in their field. But they were there very much as participants, so they did their 15-minute presentation, whatever it was, and then they were there to learn. So I love working with people that have a kind of passion for what they do and expertise, but also have that, they're committed to learn about other people's perspective. They recognize that their particular perspective is part of the jigsaw, but not the whole story. And they're really keen to learn. So yeah, that's the kind of people that I enjoy working with. And when they're talking about their thing, they don't lecture or judge, or I guess it's the empowerment dynamic rather than the drama triangle. It's shifting away from this fear, blame, and judgment. I think sometimes the wellness space is full of people virtue signaling. This is my morning routine, and this is what I made for breakfast, and it can make the rest of us feel completely inadequate. And that's coming from someone who is not brilliant in the kitchen, not very good with organization of food, that we don't have to show off how amazing we are. We all have things that we're good at and things we're not so good at. And so actually adopting more of an approach of, thinking how can you help people, which isn't always saying what an amazing person you are. And it's amazing, isn't it, the amount of things some people post on the internet. I'm not a huge social media, I have to use social media to obviously get out the message of the events I'm doing, but I think that it's that focus on, I think if we can just be all more honest, like all of us struggle some days, and it's trying to get the balance right, I think, of what you share, what you don't share, how fast you went your 5K run was this morning. And I mean, it's just exhausting, all of that, the competitiveness, I suppose, and actually just finding more ways to connect with people, which I don't think is showing, there's ways to inspire people, but it's trying to get that balance, I think, is really, really important.
Yes, I think connection is the main thing that we need to move back towards,
Yeah.
and just take a step back from social media. But just want to go back to the start of our conversation,
Mm-hmm.
where you mentioned that you support people with persistent physical symptoms, things like fatigue and pain and burnout. What are some of the patterns or the root causes you often see beneath these symptoms?
Yeah. So, really useful tool for anyone listening to this podcast. The Association for the Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms are a group of physicians in America, and they're great, I think. And they have a tool called the 12-question self-test, and that gets to the heart of this issue. So the 12-question self-test, the higher the score out of 12, the more likely it is that your symptoms are what we might call neuroplastic. Okay, so the lower the score, the more likely it is that the symptoms are structural, so related to something in the body, disturbance of metabolism or a structural problem. So if your symptoms are neuroplastic, the conventional approach to that would be, your symptoms are medically unexplained, there's nothing more we can do for you, you need to learn to live with it. That's the kind of narrative that a biomedical model gives to someone with chronic pain, for example, or has given. I mean, that is changing, but has given. So the higher the score out of 12, when I use that questionnaire all the time in my consultations, and when the score is 8 or above, I will have the conversation with the patient where I say, your body is not broken, this is a good thing to have. and explain to them that the three areas are personality traits. So perfectionism, putting the needs of others before our own, what might be called trauma responses, mental health conditions, so, depression, anxiety, but also this big thing about people who've experienced adverse childhood experiences, people who've had lots of stress in their life. People often will have had a triggering event. I had a patient, his wife had had a head injury, life-changing head injury. 3 months later, he developed completely unexplained pain down his right arm that no one could, just as it was clear that she was not going to make a significant improvement. So, it's these kind of three areas: personality traits, your mental health, and your experience of life, particularly if you've experienced adverse childhood experiences. These are factors that we know increase people's likelihood of having persistent physical symptoms. You can have persistent physical symptoms and not have experienced trauma. It's a bit like smoking and a stroke. You can have a stroke and never been a smoker, but it increases your risk. So that helps you start to see things. It's a bit like I was saying with the acupuncture and the pain. When people come in with, anyone who's listening who's a GP will know, you sometimes get people coming in with an A4 list of symptoms that make no sense from a conventional approach. And you look at it and you think, oh my God, that's about 20 tests and 3 referrals and 2 x-rays. And your gut instinct tells you it's all going to be normal. We know that I think it's about 40% of patients in general medical outpatients do not get a biomedical explanation for their symptoms. And I think it's something like 30% of patients in general practice, So the biomedical model is brilliant for structural things, infections, cancer. Great, you've got an infection, you need an antibiotic. You need a test to show which drug you need, and you need a drug. You've got cancer, you need it cutting out, you need chemotherapy. But there's this vast other area in healthcare that does not respond well to the biomedical model. It just doesn't work well. So this ATNS 12-question self-test can help you pivot between the biomedical approach and the mind-body medicine approach. And I found that to be really, really helpful. They've got loads of other free tools. www.symptomatic.me is the website, and there's loads of really useful free tools on there. When people score 8 or above, if they have chronic pain or chronic fatigue, I use Living Proof, www.livingproof.org, I think is a website. And on there, the things I use on there particularly, they have success stories. They have a 12-minute film about overcoming chronic pain and a 12-minute film about overcoming chronic fatigue. They're both lovely. So that helps people start to feel their symptoms are validated, they're real, they've been seen in relation to that, but also gives them a kind of hope often that there is an approach that can help you shift forward with that. And then that links into a whole sort of other load of resources, mainly books actually, that can help people then explore that in the comfort of their own home. So the actual time needed in the consulting room is very minimal, because you introduce the concepts in the consulting room and then the patient goes away and does all the work in their own time in the comfort of their own home.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm definitely going to check it out and read a few of the books that are on there.
Yes.
So, Kath, many of the listeners that might feel stuck between doing all the right things, but still not really feeling well. What would you say to someone who's tried the green smoothies, the supplements, the breath work, but still feeling disconnected from their body? This 12-question test and the websites that you've mentioned, that will definitely be a starting point. What else do you think? Where can people start?
So I think the first thing to think about is where are you trying to get to? Because a lot of times when I'm speaking to people in the consulting room, and particularly people who have gone completely to town with all of this stuff, they've bought this, they've done that, they've got a routine that sounds like an absolute nightmare to me. They get up and they have the cold shower, and then they do the breath work, and then they do the manifesting, and then they have the green smoothie, and it's like this constant conveyor belt of things that you have to do, and yet they still feel completely empty. And actually, I think you can just get bogged down really with all these things that you have to do, and actually trying to work out what it is, where it is you're trying to get to, and car analogies are often quite useful in the consulting room. So if you set off in a journey in the car and you don't know where you're trying to get to, you're never going to get there. You're just going to go round in circles. So I think the starting point is, who do you want to become? What is it that you are trying to be? Because unless you know that, you're never going to get there. And I think it's that understanding things rather than maybe doing things, all of these things that people do, having concepts and strategies that help you make sense of your experience. In my experience, are really helpful. I was a couple of years ago. I was in a bit of a slump, and I don't normally read that much. And I read Catherine May's book Wintering, and what I really liked about that was it was this concept that when everything is broken, everything's up for grabs. So when you feel really fed up, is actually a real opportunity to reinvent yourself. So another website, personally, I found really, really helpful is the Conscious Leadership Group. I think they're based in America. And they've got the change formula. They've got the most incredible array of, again, free resources, amazing videos about trauma triangles and empowerment dynamic, some really nice meditations, and a whole series of handouts. And one of their handouts at the end is the change formula. And the change formula, I think if I remember it correctly, V plus D brackets plus Fs minus R equals change. And I'll just explain what that means. So V is vision, D is dissatisfaction and status quo, Fs is first steps, and R is resistance. And the point is that all those things you've talked about, green smoothies, etc., are first steps. But actually vision and dissatisfaction with the status quo are much more important for change than first steps. But, first steps are a very good industry for making money. So, we all get distracted by first steps. But what we really need to think about is who do we want to be? And what are we dissatisfied about in our life? And if we're dissatisfied with feeling disconnected from others, but we're spending all our time in our house meditating, I mean, that may help us with our connection to selves, but it's not going to help us be connected to others. So I think that formula and the Conscious Leadership Group, I can't rate that highly enough. It's brilliant for anyone who's struggling with difficult relationships. It's got the most incredible handouts about conflict and how are we responding from threat, and things like the whole body yes. The whole body yes, does your mind, heart, and gut say yes? And anything other than a whole body yes is a no, basically. So just some really practical tools that people can integrate into their own life. So I think, understanding who you want to be. I mean, Atomic Habits by James Clear, that's a great book about taking tiny steps towards that. Getting away from thinking about ourselves as fixed individuals, fixed identity. And that's, again, where the biomedical model comes in. You've got emotionally unstable personality disorder. There's no cure for that. You've got ADHD. You've got all of these things that are actually a response of the nervous system to, in some way, in response to environment. But actually, they're underpinned by neuroplasticity. We are not fixed people. And if we're dissatisfied with our life enough, we can change. But you need a vision for who you want to become, and you need to harness your dissatisfaction with the status quo before you start getting too bogged down in first steps and spending a whole lot of money on that.
Thank you, Kath. That was amazing. You've given so many insightful resources. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your vision for a more sustainable NHS, and the work you're doing to remind us that practitioners need healing too. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else, like a final thought you want to share with us today?
Well, I mean, I think it's that sense, I suppose, really, that if you're feeling stuck, that it's a real opportunity to have kind of embark on an exciting adventure. I mean, that's what's ended up happening for me, and it's been really good fun, And I mean, the other thing, one of the people who came to talk about lived experience, actually, her last slide on her presentation was, "Don't let what you can't do stop you doing what you can do." And I thought that was a lovely little quote, actually, because I think, it's really easy, isn't it, to get really frustrated, whether it's American politics or the climate emergency or, all of these things that can make us feel completely overwhelmed in modern life and consume vast amounts of our energy. And actually, if you can get yourself in a little safe harbor, which is what I've tried to do with this business, where you get to do the stuff you enjoy with the people that you like spending time with, it can make life really, really fun. But if you're looking outward at all these terrible things happening in life, obviously we need to know about the terrible things happening in life, and we need to have people who are activists and are pressurizing for things to get better, but we all need to play our little part. And if knowing about all the terrible things takes all your energy and saps you of any ability to do anything, it's not serving anyone well. So, I found getting myself in my own little, most of the time, safe harbor. So obviously setting up a business doesn't always feel like a safe harbor, but it can make things really amazing and exciting.
That's exactly what I've been doing the last year, just trying to control everything that I can, but letting go of whatever I can't, because it takes too much energy, it takes sleep. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yes.
But that brings us to the end of a very powerful conversation with you, Dr. Kath, and thank you again. To the listeners, I hope you're walking away with a renewed sense of what healing can look like when it's grounded in compassion, community, and the connection to your body, not just to protocols that you see. If this episode has resonated with you, please take a moment to follow, rate, and review the show. And don't forget to share it with a friend or a colleague who might need to hear this message today. Until next time, stay grounded, stay well, and stay curious.